Gaywyck by Vincent Verga. Publisher Allison Books, Los Angeles, New York. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 20. Hand in hand, we walked along the shore. We did not speak. I glanced at his profile and marveled. One face, one voice, one habit, and two persons. A natural perspective. That is, and is not. The differences were legion. However, Cormac's beauty was coarser and worn, where Danough's face, unmarked, unlined, shone like a child's silken flesh. Cormac's was creased around the eyes and mouth. His hair was shaggy, his body not as supple. That I had ever confused the two seemed inconceivable, yet I had done it. I accepted without reservation the silence between us. I reckoned it natural for Danough to be confused and withdrawn, distant from everyone. Why had Cormac caused such suffering by disappearing, and who was buried in his grave? As with his mother, did his tombstone mark an assemblage of stones, and why the masquerade? I felt compassion for Danough's turmoil. I wanted to help him. When I reached for his hand, he kept it back from me. As we walked, there was a palpable sense of intimacy shattered. The spiraling tension between us forced me to speak. I tried to share what I had just discovered within myself. After stumbling over a few short, declarative sentences, I fell back into the silent void. To reveal was to justify. To explain was to defend. It isn't necessary, he managed weakly, clearing his throat. I understand. Understand what? I exclaimed, struck by the dissimilarity in their voices. Did you know Cormac was alive? No, he whispered in the tone of a defeated child. I was confounded by his brooding, hurt expression. He mumbled some broken phrases, one related to Cormac's mystical power over people. Taking his meaning, I saw my way free. Danough, I interrupted, taking his hand. I mistook him for you. Releasing my hand, he stopped and stared at me with incredulity. I struggled to stay calm and rational. What do you mean? He stammered, almost comically. Each and every time I was with him, I was certain I was with you. What else could I have thought? He studied my face. In his white eyes, I could read the greatest ferment. What had he been thinking? Had he been waiting at the jetty to forgive me? To give me another chance? It happened, Danough, because I needed him to be you. I needed you, so I refused to see he wasn't you. He had to be you. Who on God's earth could he have been? You told me Cormac was dead. He only came to me when you were in residence here. He answered to your name. He used your words. He wore your wristwatch. He stole my wristwatch. I laughed manically. He stared at me in frantic disbelief. I was desperate. Danough, I shouted. Danough, I thought you were loving me, Danough, and he encouraged me to think so. I wanted to be cherished, and he cherished me, or seemed to, masquerading as you. How could you think? I moved away from him. He grabbed me. He turned me to face him. I could only repeat, choking on rationalizations and excuses. My throat constricted by rising sobs, presaging embarrassing tears. I thought he was you. I wanted him to cherish me, to know. He pulled me close. I pushed away. I turned and ran. He shouted my name. Robbie! 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 Throwing the captain off, I angled my path and splashed into the low tide. The clear green water closed around me. Held aloft, distance from my anger, I felt serenity descend. On the shore, Danough Gaylord crouched with his head buried in his arms. He looked up imploringly. His lips moved. I heard him without hearing, whispering, Robbie! 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 The notion that I would knowingly seek Cormac was unforgivable. It implied not only a disgraceful collusion on my part, but a monstrous betrayal of him. I could have punched him, my beloved Danough Gaylord. I remembered my frightened father accusing me of my mother's descent into madness. He had been afraid not of me or for her, but for himself. His weakness. Danough had believed me guilty of the sin for which he failed himself. He had not seen me in the hammock with Cormac. He had seen himself, just as I had not seen him. Just as I had unjustly accused him of an act of brutality contrary to his nature. I had been as wrong as he. I could not escape it. I, who had fancied myself Florimond on first approaching Gaywyck, had been the one asleep. I lay poised on the crest of a wave. He was standing on the shore watching. I tumbled with the breaking, frothy curve. When I surfaced, he was swimming toward me, his clothing spread like a banner on the sand. Trembling, I waited for him to reach me. He stopped a yard away. We trod water, only our heads visible, as each of us waited for the other. "Forgive me, Danough," I pleaded. "Forgive me, Robbie," he responded, our words overlapping. "Love is deaf, dumb, and blind." A wave swelled and thrust me into his arms. We laughed together. I kissed him, at first tenderly, apologizing one last time before kissing him, as I had wanted to from the moment I saw him. He frowned and looked surprised, and then responded with such ardor that we were nearly taken by the current. I led him to the far seaward end of the jetty, to the flat promontory exposed by the low tide. We did not speak until love had been answered in each other's arms. We repudiated suffering, accepted the pleasures of loving. No longer a neophyte, I knew my desires. We met as equals in the most exciting of combats. We achieved manly estate. My laughter surprised him, but triggered a similar response. "You are magic," he sighed. "You seem relieved," I teased, stroking him, probing all the while. He fell silent. Stretching his full length, he inclined on his back. I washed him with seawater. The thick black hair on his body formed curls, similar to the small waves lapping at the base of the rocks. I put my head on his chest, resting beside him. He touched my face. I continued stroking him. He rose magnificently. I did as well. "I am relieved," he answered solemnly. "For the past 13 years, I've been impotent." One hot August night, he and Cormac spied on their father's meeting with Stephen and began to mimic their games, at first playfully, but then with frenzied urgency. Cormac took their father's role. Danough, Stevens, mesmerized by the scene, the impressionable Danough had totally transposed himself into the protégé's position and experienced the forbidden passion of the father he adored. At the moment of that volcanic orgasm, he fainted, awakening with his priapic capacity blasted. He had been to several doctors abroad, had been hypnotized by Dr. Chacot in Paris, and had shared in Dr. Franz's work on hysteria. But until the recent night his robe opened in my room, he allowed himself little hope. Sharing memories of that August night had aroused him. He blushed, but I stroked him more lovingly and kissed him and took his love and knew what worship is. How could we deny ever again the feelings we brought to one another? "We must forgive the past, Danough," I whispered. "We did the best we knew how." Our laughter the third time broke spontaneously, and at the same moment, splashing into the water, I swam, calling him to follow. Over my shoulder, I watched him stand and stretch in the full blazing day, proudly bearing the mark of our love. We swam together, splashing and playing like boys, then sprawled on the beach to dry. A congregation of piping plovers scurried along the surf's edge while we spoke. I wish I were braver, he said. I wish I were stronger. You are brave. You are strong. I love you entirely. Cormac was always the courageous one. Nonsense! Cormac is just quicker. He laughed loudly, frightening the birds. Robbie, I used to believe loving hateful. Don't you still think it's so? No, not loving is... After a deep silence, he added, Does Cormac love you? Yes. Then I pity him. He is more afraid of love than I. He dropped into a reverie. He was stupefied by Gaywyck's being alive. He could not speak coherently. I changed the subject, dismissing the twin from our conversation. I would manage Cormac Gaylord. Arrogantly, I regrouped my strengths, believing I held all the cards in matters of the heart. And by my denying his existence, I believed I had provoked his wrath. I would never do that again. He loved me. I could manage Cormac Gaylord. How did you get here to save me from Keys? Another tale unfolded. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.